Leonardo DiCaprio never promised anyone the same. For decades, Hollywood has crowned him as most eligible bachelor, a global star with Oscars, blockbusters, and endless headlines. But as his career soared, one question never stopped haunting him. Why had he never married? Now, at 50, DiCaprio breaks his silence with a confession that is as heartbreaking as it is revealing. Beyond the memes, the models, and the rumors lies a truth shaped by childhood scars, fame's pressure, and choices that defy tradition. Roots that resist vows before Leonardo DiCaprio became Hollywood's most elusive bachelor. His earliest lessons about love and family were already shaping the way he would approach relationships for the rest of his life. Born in Los Angeles, California, Leonardo Wilhelm DiCaprio entered the world in a family that looked picture-perfect from the outside, but fractured almost immediately. His parents, George and Ermeline, loved him deeply, but when George fell in love with another woman, everything changed. Instead of fighting bitterly and cutting ties, they created an unusual arrangement. They moved into separate houses, side by side, with a shared garden in between. For young Leo, it meant that his parents were no longer together in the traditional sense, yet they remained a constant presence. He grew up seeing love maintained without marriage, without ceremony, and without permanence in the conventional form. This unusual setup planted the first seed of what would later become a lifelong pattern. To Leonardo, stability wasn't represented by a wedding ring or a legal contract. It was represented by trust, presence, and the people who stuck around even when the rules of tradition were broken. It was a non-traditional lesson, but one that left a deep impression. When he's been asked in interviews about his childhood, Leonardo has often described his parents as bohemian, hinting at a lifestyle guided more by freedom and independence than by strict convention. While some kids dream about the big white wedding because that's what their parents modeled, Leo saw that love could exist and thrive outside of those boundaries. But it wasn't all idyllic. The neighborhoods where he grew up were far from glamorous. His childhood homes included areas of Los Angeles where crime and poverty were rampant, and substances were a common sight on the streets. Leonardo himself has admitted that he was surrounded by an environment where survival instincts mattered more than following the rules. For a boy blessed with lofty aspirations, it meant coming to terms as early as possible with the cherished fact that safety and control were things you had to build for yourself. Because, as it turned out, the random nature of his surroundings made him cling that much harder to things he could control. And then, many years later, one of the choices he made about what control was how far relationships would ever go with him. Yet, despite that chaos, Leo had a very deep respect for his parents. His mother was a legal secretary and worked quite a bit to keep putting opportunities in place for him. His father, an underground artist and distributor of comic books, led him to have this artistic outlook on the world. And both parents show him that individual passions matter, so much more than fitting into society's expectations. It meant to him he'll be called Leonardo da Vinci because his mother was wondering what he was going to become while looking at a painting from the Renaissance. Identity was always attached more closely to vision than to vows. This is another critical detail. Leo was the only biological child. His parents' attention was entirely focused on him, without siblings. Thus, he grew up in a scenario best accentuated by magnified individuality and independence. Quick at entertaining himself and thinking for himself, independence became second nature to him. While independence is a strength, it can make the idea of being life-touch feel closer to being a threat to freedom than a gift. Looking back, it's easy to see the mix of influences: bohemian parents, a fractured but functional family, rough neighborhoods, and a strong streak of independence that shaped a man wary of commitment. He learned early that love didn't have to follow tradition to be real. For him, marriage was never the ultimate test of devotion. What mattered was showing up and being present. As for offering constant support, that always felt optional at best. That does not imply that Leonardo was brought up cynical. In fact, his parents' choices informed him that love takes on many forms. However, he would repeat that lesson more times than he cared to acknowledge, especially as fame, fortune, and an endless cavalcade of relationships blocked his path. So when questions came from the world about why the superstar heartthrob remained uncommitted, the answer could have been quite simple. He never thought of marriage as a necessity in the first place. Little did he know, Those early lessons about love without vows would soon collide with another force, the overwhelming shockwave of sudden global fame. Fame's first shockwave, Leonardo DiCaprio's childhood, gave him a unique view of love. But nothing could prepare him for what happened when fame came crashing into his life. From the moment he began to stand out as a young actor, the intensity of public attention reshaped not just his career, but also his relationship to intimacy and permanence. What started with television roles quickly exploded into a kind of global obsession that no teenager could have been ready for. His breakthrough came with This Boy's Life in 1993, where he played Toby, the troubled son opposite Robert De Niro. The role required rawness, pain, and maturity, and Leo delivered in a way that critics and audiences didn't expect from someone so young. That same year, What's Eating Gilbert Grape pushed him even further into the spotlight. His haunting portrayal of Arnie earned him his first Academy Award nomination at just 19 years old. Suddenly, he wasn't just a promising young actor. He was a prodigy. People began to look at him differently, expecting greatness not only on screen but off it, too. But the real tidal wave hit in 1997, when Titanic was released. The film became a cultural phenomenon unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. It wasn't just successful, it was record-breaking, taking in over $1 billion at the box office and cementing Leo as the face of a generation. Almost overnight, he went from respected actor to global icon. Teen magazines plastered his face on every cover, screaming Leo Mania. Crowds of screaming fans followed him everywhere, and paparazzi cameras never left his side. To the public, he was Jack Dawson, the young man who loved fiercely, promised forever, and tragically died for love. But to Leonardo himself, it was suffocating. Imagine being 23 years old, thrust into the kind of global adoration usually reserved for rock stars, with every move analyzed, every date speculated on, and every friendship twisted into a headline. He became the world's most eligible bachelor without ever asking for the title. The title has brought heavy burdens. It was not just a string of romantic hero completed, but living out the hero. The suddenly whoever comes out with that person, in everyone's eyes, she is considered close to the bride. The fairy tale Jack and Rose would spill out to his real life, and the fans wanted him to act out off-screen. Leonardo did not go for it. He proved that he was really succumbing to that heartthrob label. Any such trap might force him to be cast in roles and make otherwise impractical personal demands on him. So he surrendered to the world's expectations and stopped playing romantic leads, and then specifically looked for darker, more complicated roles. And part was working with Martin Scorsese on Gangs in New York, The Aviator, and finally The Departed. He was showcased in those movies like a serious actor nowadays, willing to break the old image of the dreamboat. But this identified something else. Leo was pushing back against the fairy tale narrative both on screen and in his personal life. Being a celebrity brought its own problems with privacy. Where could he ever go without eyes on him? Whom might he date without it spreading in those tabloids? Suddenly, relationships were not private affairs between two people. There was a public spectator's excitement in millions. Privacy was no longer a matter of choice. It was a living thing. And the most effective thing to do about it was to go on casual. Never allow anything to be too permanent, too official. If everything remained fluid, it could always be unraveled without public fallout. And that was the truth that became burned into him by fame. The world will mythologize him regardless of what he did. If he could not stop the myths, at least he could control reality. And in Leonardo's reality, marriage was not an armory nor a solution. It was a headline waiting to happen. He chose to remain unmatched, free of the scrutiny that would come with saying, "I do." What happens when the world expects a wedding, but the man behind the myth keeps choosing exits? That's exactly what the next chapter in his life revealed. Patterns, not accidents. By the time Leonardo DiCaprio had survived the tidal wave of Titanic fame, a pattern was beginning to form, one that the public would dissect for decades. It wasn't just that he was dating beautiful women. It was that he was dating the same kind of women again and again, young, famous, often models, and almost always at the height of their careers. To outsiders, it looked like a Hollywood cliché. But for Leo, these choices were more than coincidence. They were part of an unspoken system of protection, control, and freedom. The first big relationship that turned heads was with Brazilian supermodel Gisele Bündchen. Their romance lasted 6 years, an eternity by Hollywood standards, and for a while, it seemed like this might be the one that changed his outlook. They were seen traveling the world together, attending high-profile events, and even advocating for environmental causes side by side. But by 2005, it was over. In her memoir years later, Gisele revealed she had reached a point where she wanted more stability, more soul-searching, while Leo wasn't ready to change. It was a theme that would repeat with uncanny precision in the years to come. Next came Bar Refaeli, another long-term partner who shared 5 years of her life with him. Once again, they looked picture-perfect in public, sitting courtside at basketball games, attending glamorous parties. But behind the scenes, the same friction surfaced. Bar later admitted that the breakup gave her time to grow and learn to be alone, a pointed comment that hinted at Leo's resistance to the kind of commitment she may have wanted. Like Gisele, she moved on to build a more traditional family life with someone else. And then came Camila Morrone, like Gisele at 5 years. So was this relationship with Camila nearly equal in time. She was much younger and, on top of that, self-sufficient, and did not hesitate to speak up about their age gap. She believed in their bond, and at times, it looked like this could break the cycle. But in 2022, after being together for a little over 5 years, they too split up quietly. The reason? Just like earlier, Leo seemed to stop just short of permanence. It wasn't messy. It wasn't scandalous. It was just that same old story in a new decade. Observers began to notice these were no accidents. This is how timing has them, as it pertains to breakups, more often than not, before relationships become too public or too demanding. Another indicator of a man seriously desiring control. To Leo, the thing about relationships was that they naturally seemed to expire, spend enough time to enjoy, yet not enough to push or escape marriage pressure. Another aspect of the theme was privacy. Of all traits, Leonardo has preferred keeping his intimate life reserved, hardly ever talking about his girlfriend. Friends and insiders tend to term his person as loyal and generous within his circle, but pretty much reserved when it comes to outsiders. For someone who lived through Titanic mania, secrecy became a cloak. By way of privacy, he has avoided the entire circus that has swirled around many of his age. He hasn't disappeared from a relationship without a divorce, though that privacy also presented to him an escape hatch. One might well dismiss such unbridled freedoms as childish or superficial, but the reality is perhaps otherwise. Already, love was something that could exist without promise. Hollywood had made real the failing of permanence under pressure. Taken together, this means that he developed a pattern giving him friendship while not losing control over it. His living requires constant change, leaving little room for his entries into models of tradition instead. His life turned into such headlines, and in line with those headlines, he tried. The public condemned him as much. One story, any of his many, would soon live its life, caricaturizing his romantic escapades into an endless punchline for his age rule. That joke, the so-called law of Leo's love life, would turn him from a private man into a meme. The meme versus the man. If Leonardo DiCaprio thought keeping his private life quiet would protect him, the internet had other plans. Over the years, one narrative about his dating history refused to die. It wasn't about who he loved, how long the relationships lasted, or even why they ended. It was about a number, 25, the so-called age rule. By the late 2010s, the idea that Leo never dated women over 25 had become a pop culture punchline. Charts circulated online mapping his girlfriend's ages against his own, showing a sharp drop-off every time his partner hit that milestone. Memes mocked him as the eternal bachelor who traded in women like leased cars, and headlines couldn't resist pointing out the pattern. It became a joke too big to ignore. Every award show, every new paparazzi sighting came with commentary. If a model turned 26 while dating him, the internet held its breath, waiting for the breakup announcement. When Camila Morrone turned 25 in 2022 and the relationship ended months later, it seemed to confirm the theory. The meme was too perfect, too irresistible for people to let go. Overnight, Leo wasn't just an actor or even a notorious bachelor. He was a caricature, a walking punchline for age and romance. But as simple as the joke sounded, it overlooked the nuances of his choices. For one, the chart ignored exceptions, women he was rumored to be connected to who didn't fit the 25 and under rule. It also ignored the fact that many of his long-term relationships lasted well into his partner's mid-20s, sometimes pushing toward 30. But nuance doesn't go viral, and memes rarely care about accuracy. The story was too clean, too funny, too scandalous to let the details ruin it. Yet, beyond the memes, real harm was wreaked. He had become a running joke, and so each joke only colored how one perceived each of his actions. For Leo, who kept his privacy sacred, it only reinforced the idea that silence worked in his favor. Addressing any gossip would reward it, he felt. Instead, he would let them throw headlines while he pursued life as he wished. Silence became his sword, but that same silence roped the caricature more tightly. By never standing up for himself, he allowed the myth to grow until it overshadowed the man. What people missed was that, in the broader context, the supposed age rule leaned perhaps more towards the side of control than immaturity. Younger partners wandered in sands a burden of expectations for marriage, kids, or long-term commitment. For a man who had been pretty clear on the matter with insiders, at least marriage was off the table. It was much easier to date younger women who felt likewise. It wasn't simply a matter of dumping women once they age out of number. It was a matter of dodging the social clock, which only seems to tick louder with time. In Leo's world, that may have felt like the only means of guaranteeing one's freedom. Besides all this, the meme spoke much about us than it said about him. This condition is still being dealt with by society, with age gaps in relationships, especially when it comes to men dating younger women. Every time Leo came out stepping with her early 20s model, it was not just a gossip-mongering activity. It became a cultural debate over power, attraction, and double standards. He had become the lightning rod for conversations much beyond the personal choices. There was not just meme mockery, but projections of frustration, questions, and judgments about what love should look like. And yet, notwithstanding the noise, Leonardo continued to live his life with little change. Friends would describe him as laid-back or very work-oriented, not at all interested in defending himself from these public musings. He knew that the jokes would eventually fade away, like those associated with other celebrities, leaving him largely unaffected. But no one could predict that one relationship would emerge and now seem to contradict the story, at least for a moment. One that felt different, more mature, and perhaps more public than many such relationships. That relationship was with Vittoria Soretti, and it hinted, just barely, that the meme might not have the final word. A different rhythm by the time Leonardo DiCaprio turned 49. His reputation as Hollywood's most famous bachelor was firmly set in stone. The jokes, the charts, the memes, they all seemed unshakable. But then, in 2023, a new name entered the story. Vittoria Soretti, an Italian model with a long-standing career in high fashion, suddenly became the woman everyone was watching. For years, Leonardo's romances had followed a predictable rhythm. Glamorous beginnings, discreet middles, and quiet endings. With Vittoria, however, the rhythm shifted. Their connection sparked at the Cannes Film Festival during the premiere of Killers of the Flower Moon. Vittoria wasn't just another rising star in the modeling world. She had already made her mark, working with brands like Versace, Gucci, and Balenciaga since her teenage years. She had lived through the pressures of fame herself, navigated her own marriage and divorce, and built a career independent of Leo's shadow. For the first time in years, it looked like he had met someone whose life experience matched his pace, someone who didn't need his fame to define her. What made their relationship stand out was how quickly it moved beyond fleeting appearances. By the summer of 2023, paparazzi spotted them vacationing in Sardinia. Soon after, they were photographed attending Halloween parties, concerts, and even art events together. The real turning point came when Vittoria was seen alongside Leonardo's mother. For insiders, that was a signal that this wasn't just another casual fling. Family introductions in Leo's world are rare, and they hinted that something deeper might be unfolding. Another striking difference was how public this romance felt. For decades, Leonardo had been a master at keeping relationships in the shadows, allowing only hints to slip through. With Vittoria, There were more sightings, more photographs, more acknowledgement. It wasn't a free-for-all, but it was noticeable enough for fans and the press to start whispering. Could this be the one? Could the eternal bachelor finally be softening his stance? Then came the news that almost blew up the internet. Victoria was photographed with a diamond ring, and the fans were quick to speculate that Leonardo had finally popped the question. After all, he was almost 50, and the time simply felt perfect. Social media was flooded with conspiracy theories, but before the rumor could pick up steam, it was debunked. The ring had been in her jewelry collection long before their romance began.